XG is a mysterious, abstract concept, impossible to pin down. You have to search for it like the great explorers of old, chopping your way through the jungle, looking for El Dorado, that El Dorado being XG, to find its true secrets. Or in the case of XG and Football Manager, you could just send a DM to SciSports, who makes the XG model for Football Manager, and get an interview with the project lead. I went for the El Dorado one. What's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. I'm just going to not integrate this cleverly and tell you, if you like this video, subscribe to the channel so that I can continue to pay the team we put together to do videos like this. Yes! And pay for chairs and spin, baby! That was 2 right there. Okay. What we've done today is we've gotten in touch with SciSports, and we are able to talk to Jan. And Jan was integral in putting together the XG, the expected goals model, in Football Manager. And if you do not have Football Manager 21, congratulations. You now know that Football Manager 21 has XG in it, which is the beginning of what I'm assuming is going to be a long line of introducing the kind of in-depth analytics that we see in real life. And SciSports is a company that actually handles that as well as Football Manager. So we had the opportunity to do both. So what we're going to do is we're going to play that interview for you in bits and pieces, and I will stop it to elaborate on points that he has. All right, Jan, let's go.
So I'm Jan van Heijden. I'm a Belgian guy working for a Dutch company called SciSports, where I'm the Chief Analytics Officer, and I was heavily involved in the development of the expected goals model that's currently featured in Football Manager.
The company is actually so intimately tied to Football Manager because of the person that founded its unique story before they even started working with SI on an XG model.
Our founder, Giels Brouwer, he also uses our recruitment platform when he plays Football Manager.
Okay.
So he's a Football Manager fan, and his dream, that's actually what makes this collaboration with between SciSports and Sports Interactive so interesting. His dream originally was to actually build Football Manager in the real world. So he was like a huge fan of Football Manager, and he was using a lot of data in the game, and he said like, yeah, but we can do this in the real world as well, right? And he did like an internship at the FC Twente, which is like a relatively small Dutch football club. And then he found out that like in the real world, things were quite, well, there was actually very little use of data at that point in time, and that's actually what inspired him to found the company.
So now that they're in and SI invited them to handle the XG, there was actually a different, interesting challenge for a boy Jan here and the people that he was working with, because there is a huge difference between calculating XG in real life and in Football Manager. The only limit to the amount of information you have in Football Manager is the computational space that you're given by FM Mobile or whatever. You have to be able to fit it into a package that can run at a certain spec. This means that you have all of the data possible of where everybody is at all times, making XG in Football Manager almost more accurate than XG in real life, because it is much more difficult to get that kind of information of players' intent and position to calculate this sort of thing. And believe it or not, we got into that.
Yeah, obviously having more data available makes the model better. I think, the biggest advantage is that we can assess the expected goals values for individual shots better. So the more context you can take into account, the better your expected goals value will be. So most of the time people aggregate expected goals values across multiple shots. And then it doesn't really matter if you miss some of the context here and there, because in the end, the expected goal sum will roughly remain the same. However, for individual shots, missing some important piece of context can have a relatively big impact on the expected goals value. So, I would say that the biggest advantage is in being able to analyze individual shots and individual matches to in more detail. So many of the real world expected goals models are used or are trained on what we tend to call play-by-play data or event data. So it only records the on-the-ball actions that players perform, which means that often the exact locations of the players are not known. However, in many cases, it's quite important to know whether like a defender is still blocking the goal mouth or not, for instance. So that's some like one piece of information that's often missing in real-world expected goals models. Although there are models who take this into account as well, and that's something that's really easy to get from the match engine, for instance. Also, for instance, body orientation is something we can take into account in Football Manager quite easily. But this type of data is often not recorded in the real world. So if you're like turned with your back to the goal or not, that makes a huge impact, of course, in the real world. But often it's ignored in the real world. However, in Football Manager, we have this data available, and we can also take it into account when computing this expected goals value. So it's always trying to find a good balance between trying to be as accurate as possible, taking as much information as possible into account, and also making sure that the user experience is still fine. So that also made this collaboration between SciSports and Sports Interactive quite interesting for me personally. I have a computer science background, so I also like these software engineering challenges that the team was faced with. And they took care of it, fortunately, but was quite interesting for me to think along and to see what kind of challenges they experience.
That balance does not dash the confidence of Jan and SciSports. So when you're complaining about XG in Football Manager, you actually might be complaining about something that's just literally better than what's in real life.
And I would even say that this expected goals model is likely more accurate than the majority of the real-world expected goals models that's out there, simply because it has access to more data. People who play the game might obviously observe some differences between the expected goals numbers they're used to from the real world and the ones they see in the game, but that's mostly because this game engine is not super realistic. So the game engine is very realistic, of course, as we all know, although it still has some dissimilarities with the real world, and that also becomes apparent when you look at like expected goals tallies for matches, for instance.
And then there, of course, is the point that we have all speculated on. Is this XG, especially working with SciSports, part of a long-running development in the future to increase the power of the analytics in the game? Or is this just a one-off addition where you said, well, let's write up an XG script that we're going to use for the next decade? Well,
discussions are still going on. But obviously we have the intent to continue our collaboration, and hopefully we can improve upon the expected goals model for the next iteration of the game. So it will hopefully be like a continuous effort to make sure that we always have the best possible expected goals model in the game. If the game engine undergoes some serious changes, then the expected goals model also needs to be compatible with these changes.
And so this is probably not the last time we're talking.
Well, I hope not.
So XG in FM is more accurate than XG in real life because more data is available. The computational space is restricted. And yeah, I had a headache after I did the interview, but it looks like Jan and I are going to be fast friends. Yeah, looking forward to another video where we're able to sit down and talk about how analytics is going to work in Football Manager and continue to get better.